Alright, so we learned how to, just draw basic, lines and apply texture using the raster tab. We can also fill in large areas too. So here I have a bunch of drawings that I did, right? And I could try to fill this in, by just kind of painting something and then, using a brush or some sort, right? But that can be a little bit difficult. So instead what I'm going to do is we're going to use the fill tool. The fill tool, it looks like a little paint bucket tipping over. It's kind of like the fill tool in other programs like Photoshop and such, where it's going to fill in a large area. Okay. So it's important that whatever you fill in is closed, like fully. Okay. So I'm going to grab this tool. Like with the painting, you can fill based on whatever your color is. So I'm going to make a new color. Now let's just make it yellow. I'll make it kind of like a low saturated yellow. And you can see that I have this little paint bucket with a little crosshair. That crosshair is wherever I'm going to be filling in. So if I click, it fills in that whole area. Okay. Now, it's like I said, it's important that your shape be completely closed. Okay, so here in this example, I deliberately didn't close this all the way. If I was to use my paint bucket in an area like this, you can see it actually filled in the whole scene, right? The whole diagram. So, that's not what I want. So always make sure that, your object is completely closed. Oops, wrong color. Before you fill it, okay? So this is filling in an area. Any closed shape will do. You can also do what's called the line. The line is the actual line itself. That's the perimeter. This will come up more for vector graphics, but I'm going to create a new color. Let's just make it red. And under my fill, under mode, I'm going to go to areas and switch it from areas to lines. Lines are going to be this, and you can see it even changes the icon a little bit. See, when I click on it and I drag this line, it changes not the fill, but the surrounding perimeter line to a new color. So, you can do this kind of stuff. You can use the fill tool to fill in an area or fill in a line. Or do both, depending on what you're clicking on. Most of the time, I'm probably going to want to use it for areas. I'm going to save. This was scene 4. Let's go to scene 5. Okay. So, you use the tool here. I'm just going to click. You can draw lines. Let me just kind of go back to a regular line here. Okay. If I want to make a straight line, I can actually hold down the Shift key as I draw, and you can see I get this little red line. So I can control my line. And so you could use this. I could build a simple shape. Just going to draw 4 lines and make kind of a, rectangle or square shape. And I could fill this in using the fill tool we just talked about. Another way to do this is you can actually just use pre-built shapes. So below the brush tool is the geometry tool. And what it allows you to do is build a shape. The thickness is how thick the line is going to be. So if I click and drag, you can see I'm building a square shape or a rectangle. If I let go, it builds that shape with that thickness. I'm going to undo this by using Command or Control Z. So if I increase the thickness from 1 to say like 20, and I redid this, you can see I got a much thicker line this time. So the thickness is in pixels, okay? You can also set up how hard the edge is, so I can make it more or less blurry if you want something like that. You can see it's a little blurrier here. I like my edges nice and hard or crisp though. This is the shape that you're going to be dealing with. So default usually is the rectangle. If I hold down Shift, I make a perfect square. Usually it starts from the upper left-hand corner. If you hold down the Option or the Alt key, you can start from the center. You can see I'm just going from the center outward instead of going from the upper left to the lower right. So that's the rectangle. I could do a circle. By default, it'll make a circle. You can do an ellipse, which is basically an oval shape. Using the ellipse and you want a perfect circle, hold down the Shift key. Like with the square, if you want to start from the center, use the Alt or the Option key as you click to do that. You can also just make a line. This shows you the line that you're going to create. If you hold down Shift, it'll lock it to increments of 45 degrees. So you can see I'm only going in increments of 45 degrees here. A polyline is a that lets you make your own shape. So this is my line or my side. I can click, 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 click. So I'm making multiple lines for my shape. Return back to the origin and it forms a shape. So this is good for sort of non-traditional shapes if you wanted something that wasn't, say for instance, a square or a rectangle or a circle. So like, you know, if I was wanted to make like maybe a little crown shape, this would be a nice easy way to do that really quickly, and then use a fill tool to fill it with a color or something like that. Arc makes an arc. So essentially, oops, let me change back to black. It's a little easier to see. So this is my first point, this is my second. So this is going to be the direction, and then you set the height. So you can see I'm making an arc here. So I'm just going to make it go up. And there's my arc shape. I'm going to have it go the other direction. A multi-arc is kind of like the multi-polyline in that it lets you make multiple arcs just by clicking and making lines and then dragging to make your arc shape. And you can also just make a polygon shape. This lets you set how many sides you want. So if I did 3, that would be a triangle. 4 should be a square or a diamond if it's rotated. Pentagon, hexagon, so on and so on. Also, by default, when you create the shape, it's just going to point, 0 degrees to the top. If you want to rotate it while you're laying it out, click on this little rotate option, check marks. So when I click and drag, first it'll make the shape, and then it'll allow you to rotate. So this is good for, if you don't want to make something that's purely facing north. So I'm going to make a triangle, but then I want the triangle to face like this. Alright, try that out. Try, making some shapes using the geometric tool and filling them in using the fill tool.